Now for a closer look at the power struggle between Washington and Silicon Valley. Critics and competitors of Google say the Obama administration missed a golden opportunity to derail the tech giant's dominance of the search engine space back in 2013. That's according to a report by Politico, which also says that the fumble in Washington paved the way for the dominance of Google. So Leah Nylen, the Politico reporter behind the article, is with us now from Washington. This was fascinating. And though your report is focused on Google, you could almost apply, sort of a similar criticism to their approach to other dominant tech companies. Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, all of these companies have been allowed to grow almost unchecked. And it's really only recently that we are looking back and asking questions about that. So let us focus on Google, though. 2013, the competitors of Google are starting to complain that the search engine is using unfair practices to dominate. Tell us about what happens in 2013.
So the Federal Trade Commission, that's one of the two U.S. federal agencies that's in charge of antitrust, they did a deep investigation into Google. They looked at allegations that it was biasing its search results so that you would see Google's products at the top and rivals much lower down, so you were less likely to click on them. And they also looked at a bunch of other things, including Google's contracts with a lot of smartphone makers, telecom providers, and Apple to make sure that Google is the default search engine on your smartphone. They ended up not doing anything, though. They decided to close the probe in 2013 without taking any action, which is really what the article is looking back on. Why did they decide to do that at 2013?
So that was partially what I thought was so fascinating, that their predictions about where Google was going and where the way we use tech was going, it was so off, and it looks it just sort of, you're dumbfounded when you read them from this vantage point about the use of smartphones, that they felt that people really wouldn't be searching for anything on smartphones because people search on the computer. Can you sort of go through the list of things that they got wrong?
Yeah, so the one that surprised me the most was some of the things they said about smartphones. So they looked at smartphones and they said, well, not a lot of people use smartphones to search right now. It was something like only like 8% of the market for search. Most people did it on desktop. So they said, it's not a big part of the market. We don't need to worry about it. But that totally misses the fact that more and more people were getting smartphones. And pretty soon after, it was only like 2 years later, smartphone searches completely came to dominate desk phone searches. One of the other things they said that was sort of surprising is that there was going to be a lot of competition between different companies in the smartphone space. And while that was true in the really early 2010s, you may remember that was when BlackBerry still existed, when there were like Nokia phones, Microsoft phones. By 2012, 2013, we were really back down to the two, to Apple and Google. And that's how it stayed for the past, decade. The other thing that was really surprising to me was they predicted that targeted advertising was not going to take off. And everybody knows, you have shoe advertisements following you across the web now. That's been pretty ubiquitous for a long time. And that was really surprising for the FTC to say, because it has this entire other arm within the agency that's job is to focus on consumer protection. And they had been warning for at least 2 years before that targeted advertising was becoming more ubiquitous and raised potential privacy problems for consumers.
So you may not have sort of come to a conclusion, but do we know why it is they got it so wrong? Because everyone else seemed to see what was coming.
I mean, we didn't really come to a conclusion. We sort of highlighted a lot of things that went into their thinking. They had some of these strange assumptions about the future of technology. Back in 2012, 2013, people really looked at the tech giants and Silicon Valley in a different way than we do now. People thought that they were like great American companies making a lot of jobs. They didn't really want to cut down on that, especially coming out of that 2008 recession. So a lot of those things really fed into the U.S.'s decision to do nothing. And we sort of see now what has come out of that.
Right, and so over the past 10 years or so, we've seen these companies gobble up their competitors and just incorporate them into the services that they offer as part of their platform. There are states now, led by Texas, that have you're putting forth an antitrust lawsuit against Google. It was filed in December. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, sure. So the Texas Attorney General filed a big lawsuit against Google in December. It focuses a lot on one of Google's two main areas that they make a lot of money, and this is on advertising. So Google owns all of this technology that underlies all of the advertisements you see online. You never see any of this technology, you just see the ad, but they own all of the technology that helps other companies buy, sell, or put it on the website. And Texas's Attorney General has filed a lawsuit against them over that. They just amended it yesterday, actually, and 5 additional states joined. So there are now 14 states and territories who are suing over this. They're asking for damages against Google to compensate for its monopoly of the market and some things that it says it deceived consumers over. So, for example, it says that if you have an Android phone and you use WhatsApp, if you back up your texts, they go into the cloud where they're no longer encrypted. And Google was able to see those chats that you have on WhatsApp and sell advertisements against them.
It's so, Google, for example, is just so big and so ubiquitous. I don't know if they can turn back the hands of time, sort of. It's a verb, for goodness sake, at this point. How is Google responding?
So Google has said that the report that we published has actually proved that, their search engine helped consumers. They went through and found various things where it talks about how overall, when they changed the search results, it was to improve the search quality. In antitrust lingo, that means that, there was some consumer welfare. There were good things for consumers in there, and that might have helped them win an antitrust lawsuit in court. There are now a lot of antitrust lawsuits against Google pending. There is that one by Texas that you mentioned. There's also a pretty major one by the Justice Department that's also pending that looks at some of these mobile phone contracts, these contracts for mobile that Google has with like Apple and Mozilla and all of the smartphone makers to be the default search engine. The biggest problem there is even if they win, there aren't that many other search engines that could replace Google. So that's why it's expected that they may ask to break up parts of Google's search empire if they win.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of cracking down going on in Europe, but only here in the U.S. can these platforms be broken down if that's going to be the remedy because they're American companies. Leah Nylen, thank you so much.
Thank you.